Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Pro Democracy Podcast with Mila Garayeb and I. Today, we're going to be talking about, we called our episode Cracking Open Chinagate. So Mila asked me, what is Chinagate? And my response was, it's all of it, right? It's like every bit of scandal, controversy, propaganda that we're being fed on like a monthly basis. It seems like every month there's like a new thing. And today we're actually fortunate to have Carl Zha with us to talk about recent developments in Taiwan with the U.S. It being revealed that the U.S. for the last year has been secretly training the Taiwanese military. And we have Josh Cho. He's an excellent journalist who has been pretty thoroughly covering the lab leak theory from a perspective which has, through his reporting, he's shown that most of the talking points that promote this idea that the coronavirus leaked through the Wuhan Institute of Virology are actually just false and being misrepresented by the media. This is something that I actually covered, and I believe I was censored for trying to cover. So a quick aside before we get to our guests. Actually, on the day that Josh put out his first article about the lab leak was the same day that I put out my article, but my article wasn't really an investigative report like Josh's was. He was much more thorough than me. And the reason for that was because my article was initially intended to be an opinion article with Business Insider. So I got a contract with Business Insider to write one op-ed per month for them. So I pitched my first op-ed. It was about the lab leak. They accepted it, and I wrote it, and then it made it through the first round of edits before it made it to a second editor. And at that point, the second editor, while he was editing it in the Google Doc, I could see this. I was informed that I would not be able to publish that with them. And they gave me a really obtuse response. I've written about this on my Substack, so I don't want to go too long. You guys can see the rationale they gave me. But then a week later, they completely canceled my contract, so I never actually published anything with them. So it's a very contentious topic. I would say that it goes against the grain of like what is acceptable to report in mainstream outlets. I think a big part of that is not just that it, covering this is in an effort to tone down hostility with China, but really the CIA's role through their stenographers in the press, through their obedient lackeys in the media, in the Washington Post and other outlets, was able to like mainstream this idea, because it was once like, at first, the first year of the coronavirus, it was very, the consensus was that the lab leak theory was bunk. You couldn't talk about it on Facebook. Facebook did, in fact, censor it. And then there was like overnight kind of a change in tune. So I kind of showed how the CIA played a hand in all of that. But what Josh has done has been like far more thorough in debunking this theory. So I'm really excited to have both Carl and Josh on with us today. It looks like, Josh, your connection is kind of poor. Are you able to communicate? No, I don't think so.
Can you hear me now?
Josh? Yeah. So thanks for joining us, guys.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Mine's a little spotty. I can hear you, but I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can hear you. You're pretty blurry. And your frames aren't really moving. Well, is there something that you can do to figure out your Wi-Fi situation, and we can talk to Carl a little bit first? Do you have an Ethernet cable, maybe?
Okay, yeah, I'll try and figure out what's going on. I'll be right back.
Okay, so we'll talk to Carl.
I'm a little bit too far from my router for Ethernet cable to work.
Okay. So hopefully Josh will be joining us again in a minute. Thank you for bearing with us. Carl is the host of the Silk and Steel podcast. He's very vocal on Twitter and debunking anti-China propaganda. He's one of my favorite people to follow. He's just hilarious. And what I love about Carl's tweets is just how he like gathers the most absurd shit that China hawks are saying and just puts it out there, just for people to be like, realize how crazy they are, how hungry for hostility they are. So I can't think of a more perfect time to have you on the podcast than, this week when hostilities are so high. I think one mistake that I've been seeing a lot repeated in the media on Twitter is that the U.S. and China are closer to war. And I think that's a mistake because I don't see an actual hot war happening, regardless of how heightened the tensions are right now. The U.S. would lose like so quickly, right? We're dealing with a population that's like many times bigger than our own. And I think a military that has a little bit more discipline, just if you know any people in the U.S. military or read the news, you can get a pretty good idea of how frequently there are problems with troop discipline, and I think that would play a big role. But
did you see that news? The U.S. nuclear submarine just ran into something unknown in South China Sea. This just happened a couple of days ago.
Yeah, China doesn't really do that, and you know what? If they did, I don't think the media would find out. They have like a better control on that kind of stuff. But so yeah, that's exactly my point, Carl. So I mean, what's your take on all this? I think it's fair to say that there's already war. It's just a hybrid war. It's information, economic, cultural, other things. But what's your take on all that, Carl?
Unfortunately, right now in U.S., the competition with China is bipartisan. On one side we have the ultra hawks. They want a confrontation with China over Taiwan. And on the other side, the doves, quote unquote doves, they say, well, let's cool it off a little bit. Let's try with economic sanctions. This is the two side of the debate in U.S. right now. There's nobody saying, hold up, wait a minute. Why do we have to have this tension with China? Why is this necessary? Nobody bothered to explain. And regarding the current crisis over Taiwan, I think we have to keep in mind, even United States government bureaucracy is not one monolith, and there are different interest groups. Particularly, the national security establishment has been edging for a confrontation with China for a long, long time. I mean, ever since the collapse of Soviet Union in 1990. U.S. military and the Pentagon and all the intelligence military complex, they wanted to portray China as some kind of Soviet Union 2.0, just to justify the defense budget. They didn't want cut back after the end of Cold War. And so I remember I came to United States in 1990, and right away I was already reading about articles in mainstream media about so-called China threat. But back in 1990, China was still a developing country. It's still trying to pull itself through poverty. So it's not very convincing. The argument that China was Soviet Union 2.0 was not convincing. And for a long time, there was two camps in U.S. There's the pro-engagement camp and the containment camp. Pentagon has always been on the containment camp, but they were balanced by the pro-engagement camp in the business community because they just want to go to China and make tons of money. They want to leverage the Chinese cheap labor, the newly open Chinese market. So for a long time, there was a balance. But until very recently, I say happened in the last 5 years, what what China has done is China has pulled itself up and economically, and now China is also an economic threat to the U.S. hegemony in the world. That's why the previous pro-engagement camp in U.S. the business community, now they have backed up because they realize now the China is a rival to them. People like, especially a lot of the big tech companies in U.S. That have dominated our lives. Facebook, Google, all of them, they already achieved hegemony in much of the world. For example, when the Facebook went out, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, it went out not just for United States, it went out for much of the world. I'm in Indonesia. I was affected. I couldn't get on Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. But China is still holding out because China, they had the great firewalls, they had their own apps, they built TikTok. For the Chinese, for the American tech giant, that is a threat. That is why you're seeing the U.S. There was during the Trump administration, there was even an attempt to kill off TikTok, and because
capture.
Yeah, exactly. They're trying to get TikTok sold off to Microsoft, and so right now it's a four spectrum, like you said, a hybrid war with China. But there's degrees of differences. So if you notice recently, Biden actually reiterated the U.S. commitment to the one China principle and recognized that Taiwan is part of China. Right away, you see all these news items about Chinese warplanes invading "quote unquote" Taiwan airspace, and then U.S. aircraft carriers sailing into South China Sea. So many people there's many people in the national security establishment. They do not want to see U.S. move into a more conciliatory stance with China. They didn't like what Biden sound bites lately, so they're doing their best trying to keep pushing the confrontation forward. For example,
that's interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt, but real quick, it's almost like what we saw with Trump, where he would put out this policy idea that was kind of more in favor of detente with the DPRK, for example, and then he was totally undermined by the media, the military, and all the other kind of establishment forces. So
and
that's
Russia
really interesting.
Russiagate, because he reset with Russia was a big Trump Trump idea, but the blob totally pushed against it because the NATO, all the jobs at stake in the NATO institution, this is good American jobs at stake here. So yeah, so we're seeing similar thing playing out against China right now. Because there's also a party divide in United States. The Democrats were pushing for the Russiagate, right, during the Trump years, whereas the Democrats want to get tough with China, and right now, there's not even much pushback from Republican on getting tough with China. Everybody in U.S. want to get tough on China. Yeah, so that's where we are. And if you actually look at for example, the latest so-called Taiwan crisis, it's a lot of manufactured nothing burger. A lot of the media reporting the Chinese are running 100 incursions into the Taiwan "quote unquote" airspace. So it gives you the impression that Chinese fighter jet is flying over the city of Taipei. People are looking up and seeing Chinese fighter jet in the sky. That's not even the case. The Chinese fighter jet didn't even cross the island of Taiwan anywhere close. What was the reported incursion was actually reported by the Taiwan Defense Ministry. They reported an incursion against the Taiwan ADIZ, the Air Defense Identification Zone. So for people who are interested, I encourage you to Google ADIZ. There's actually a Wikipedia article on ADIZ, and there's an entry under Taiwan. You can see the map of the Taiwan ADIZ zone. Fully half of it is actually over Chinese mainland. So you can see Yeah, over the land of Chinese mainland. But then people are saying, oh, wait a minute. But the latest incursion was not over the Chinese mainland. It was over the other half. That's correct. The Taiwan Defense Ministry was actually kind enough to post like hourly updates of all the PLA flight path across their ADIA zone. And you can see from the map they posted, the most of these PLA flight over, they're still circling closer to the mainland Chinese coast rather than anywhere near Taiwan. It's just because of Taiwan drew this ridiculously large ADIA zone, which, by the way, was designed by United States Armed Forces in 1950s. So during the Cold War, U.S. design there's no international law. There's no international law basis for ADIA zone. It's something that any country just declare unilaterally. And United States is the first country that declared ADIA zone around United States. And then it instituted ADIA zone in Japan and South Korea during the Cold War, during Korean War. And it also put this ridiculously large ADIA zone over Taiwan. So China is saying we don't recognize that. But there is a more increased frequency of Chinese flight path skirting the edges of these ADIA zones. So the way that the Chinese Air Force did it, they didn't want to be overly provocative, like flying directly over the island of Taiwan. What they're doing instead, they're cutting corners and around the edges of this Taiwan ADIA zone and just saying, hey, we don't recognize your ADIA zones. This is international airspace. But what Chinese action is response of is actually a response of to the U.S. action, which is rarely talked about in the media. Currently, U.S. is holding military exercise with Japan and UK. They send 4 aircraft carrier strike groups into South China Sea. This happened just before the reported Chinese incursion into Taiwan airspace. This is what Chinese are responding to. They understand that Taiwan is just a client state of the United States. They don't need to do this demonstration to Taiwan. They're doing this to United States. They know you're coming to the South China Sea. Look, we don't care about this ADIA zone created by the United States Air Force, and we also let you know that we have the coverage over South China Sea that you are now entering into. So this is that's every time in the U.S. MSN, what they do is do the news by omission. They tell partial truth. They tell you about the Chinese flight over. They don't emphasize on the fact that there's a 4 aircraft carrier strike group sailing into South China Sea to perform military drills. Thousands of miles from the mainland United States coast.
Yeah. So my question to you is: has China laid any high-speed rail in Taiwan's airspace?
We all would like to see that.
Well,
okay.
go ahead, Mila, please.
I found, like you had mentioned, there was like a bipartisan consensus on China and the US. And what I find very disturbing in Canada is the media is really, and I said this in our Cuba episode too, but there's the media is really like trying to punish politicians who do not want war with China. We had an MP here who tried to say, maybe we should be diplomatic with them, and with the whole Two Michaels story. And what happened is that the media then kind of started like, accusing her of sympathizing with dictators. There was like whole articles dedicated to that. There's media that's, basically begging our prime minister to be tougher on China. And so I'd also be curious for you and Josh as well to sort of speak to the role that the media has been playing in this, as well as the political parties.
This is a definitely an orchestrated campaign. What you're witnessing in Canada has already played out in Australia. You know, Australian the politicians in Australia who wanted friendly relationship with China has already been effectively silenced over the last few years. There's a whole campaign in Australia stirred up by ASPI, the ostensibly Australian think tank that's had most of its budget supplied by United States State Department and Lockheed Martin. They accuse any Australian politicians who want conciliatory role toward China as Beijing stooge, CCP stooge in Australia, and they pushed a bunch of legislation against so-called CCP influencing Australian politics. So they actually conducted a witch hunt in Australia. Now all the voice that's asking Australia to have a reasonable relationship with China has been effectively silenced. And I don't know how they orchestrated, but if I treat it as a black box and watch it as an observer from outside, it does appear like a media orchestrated media campaign. I think that ties to what Josh is going to talk about is on the COVID lab leak theory that originally was pushed by White House officials under Trump administration. It was Matt Pottinger, who was a deputy national security advisor. He was tasked with handling the initial U.S. COVID response, but they screwed up so bad that he decided the best thing we can do now is shift the blame to China. So he worked through his media pets, like Josh Rogan in Washington Post, and really pushing hard for the lab leak theory. That, unfortunately, even after Biden came to power, the Democrats had a chance to step back from all these Trump era rhetoric, but they didn't because COVID is still an issue in the United States. We now have the Delta strain, so let's keep doing what we're doing. And it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and just to tack on to that, I mean, I think the big thing that they've continued vis-a-vis China from the Trump administration is the policy regarding Xinjiang with the Uyghurs. For example, Biden appointed a longtime Obama official. She was in various posts throughout the Obama administration, Samantha Power.
Yes.
To the director of USAID, the United States Agency for International Destruction, as I call it.
That's a good one.
But at the summit, and you may have read my piece, Carl, at the International Religious Freedom Summit in Washington, D.C. that I went to, where both Mike Pompeo, a lot of other Trump officials, Samantha Power, Nancy Pelosi, Anthony Blinken, they were all there. One thing that Samantha Power said during her speech was that she had, in her first week as director of USAID, met with Tersane Ziwaduin. I think it's the pronunciation. So this is a Uyghur woman who has in recent times claimed to have bore witness to government-sponsored mass rape, all kinds of other horrendous tactics by supposedly by the Chinese Communist Party. But if you look back, and this is something I didn't realize when I wrote my article, but if you look back and the initial mentions of her in the media in BuzzFeed, she's saying things like, "Oh, it wasn't all that bad." So her story has changed, and the more salacious it's gotten, the more access she's gained to high-level U.S. government officials and been able to influence their policy. Blinken and his State Department are very much continuing the same kind of policies as the Trump administration in regards to Xinjiang. And I think what the big thing that people don't realize about this, now there may be some policies that as Westerners we don't agree with. They don't comport with our values in Xinjiang, right? That may be true. But there's, first of all, no evidence of a genocide. The statistics are constantly changing. When we do get statistics, they're furnished to us by discredited people like Adrian Zenz. And this is all happening within the context of China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? So obviously, you were talking about this earlier, in the 90s, China, people were identifying it as a problem, but it wasn't considered so much of a problem because they were a growing power. Now it's clear they're going to overtake the United States. And a big piece of that puzzle, to a big component of their economic growth, is the Belt and Road Initiative. And in order to get, goods, Chinese goods to the West, Xinjiang needs to be a part of that, right? And so the United States is doing, exactly what it did with the Mujahideen, with the jihadist rebels in Syria, and they're using it. They're using them. They're using the economic policies, the campaign to boycott cotton from Xinjiang to create dissatisfaction among the people, right? If there's no jobs, then who are they going to blame? They're going to blame their government, and they're going to try to rise up. So that seems to be the goal here. But at this point, I do have to end the Twitter live stream. We're going to be going exclusively over to Rockfin. I hope everybody joins us because Josh has not gotten a chance to talk yet, and he's got some really insightful stuff to share with all of us. So please join us on Rockfin and hear about Josh's fantastic exposés of the propaganda around the lab leak theory and why it's totally trashed and you shouldn't believe it.
I will shut up now so Josh can talk.
Yeah.
Can he talk?
Yeah. Josh,
sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. So, okay, Josh,
Okay, that's awesome.
you've had, by my count, 3 articles. I could be wrong. The first one was with Fair, which was an excellent piece. And then the latter 2 were with Mint Press. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Well, basically, the 3 you're talking about are science focused, and the 4th one was another one at Fair, but that was more focused on the politics of the WHO origins investigation. That was just, so yeah, the 3 you're talking about are very science focused, and the latter was just on the politics question, like why, if China knows it's innocent of a lab leak, why would they not cooperate with further investigation of the Wuhan Institute of Virology? I mean, I don't think that's an unreasonable question to ask. Like, I think it's a natural question. Like, oh, if you know you're innocent, why wouldn't you cooperate with the investigation? So I figured that one was worth addressing in another piece. But yeah, the 3 you're talking about are science-focused pieces.
I see. So okay, so like, I've read your pieces. It's been a little while now, but you keep taking these smoking guns that have been identified by journalists that will not be named. But you keep taking the key pieces of evidence which are being used to promote this theory. I don't really think theory is even a really appropriate word for it. And you show how they're being misconstrued in the media. So I'd like it if you could talk about what's been like the biggest lie of all of this, right? And I suspect that there's a delay here.
Well, okay. Well, if you want to talk about everyone's favorite buzzword, it's probably gain of function research. Lots of people, lots of lab leak theorists like to throw that word around. But just to make sure, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Is my connection just fine?
No, but we can hear you.
That's great. Sorry, I'm a little paranoid. Okay, but so that's probably the most popular one, and it's become popularized, I think, because there was a huge public spectacle about it, confrontation between Anthony Fauci and Rand Paul, I think the first one, Rand Paul basically accused the NIH and Anthony Fauci of being responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic by funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And that was in May 2021. And then the second confrontation, which was a little bit more spicy, Rand Paul basically accused Fauci of lying, and Fauci responded back that Rand Paul is lying and that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And that caused a lot of drama, and obviously that generates a lot of news cycles and controversy. So I think that's probably the biggest lie.
I hate it when my two favorite people
and,
fight.
Talking to so many scientists. Yeah,
I'm sorry. I really shouldn't interrupt you because there's this delay and it's just messing everything up. So I'm gonna let you continue. Sorry.
No, it's fine. But so I think lots of people were just confused about what gain-of-function research actually is, and whether the Wuhan Institute of Virology was actually doing it, and three, whether gain-of-function research is even capable of creating SARS-CoV-2. And I think on all three of those counts, not many people know what gain-of-function research is. I think for most people, just to me, like from when I see on people on Twitter talk about what gain-of-function research is, it just seems to be crazy scientists are doing scary stuff I don't understand. That's probably the most popular definition in the Twitter sphere. Number two, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, as a fact, was not doing gain-of-function research. And number three, even if they were doing gain-of-function research, you could not create SARS-CoV-2 from gain-of-function research anyways. So on all three counts, it's not true that they were doing that. And I think that's probably the biggest lie. And the second biggest lie, which I devoted another Mint-Press article to, was the idea that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing research in subpar safety conditions, which is, the implication is, if Chinese scientists were lying about not having SARS-CoV-2, they were more likely to have a lab accident just because their safety standards are so poor. But that's also not true. So I devoted many thousands of words, and if anyone watched my interview with Danny Haifong, I couldn't remember every single thing I wrote just because there was so much to cover. So, yeah.
I know that feeling. So talk to us about, because what we've been told from the media is that leaked cables leaked to Josh Rogan and then FOIA'd by others, cables from the State Department showed that there were safety concerns at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That's what we've been told by the media. What did they actually say?
So in April 2020, Josh Rogan had a State Department cable from U.S. diplomats who visited the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and he quotes two paragraphs from it, and he basically gives a very contrived interpretation of what they meant, and he tried to spin it as, oh, look, U.S. diplomats visited, and they were very worried about the unsafe working conditions there, but at the time, actual virologists who know how to interpret these cables and the significance of what they mean is for example, Dr. Angela Rasmussen, she's a virologist in Canada, based in Canada, I believe, at the moment. But she stated that the sections of the cable that Josh Rogan cited don't actually say that. What they said was that they wanted more experienced personnel or more trained personnel to handle dangerous viruses more safely. And that's a problem, or that's an issue not just at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but like at scientific institutions around the world, like in Australia, for example. So it's not unique to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And one thing she stated at the time was that they asked for more funding and that the research was important. And if the U.S. diplomats actually truly believed that the research was being done in unsafe conditions, they would not ask for more money. They would ask to cut off funding because they would think that Chinese scientists are too incompetent to do it properly. So that's a more logical conclusion. And 3 months later, when the Washington Post released a full unredacted State Department cable, it basically vindicated Dr. Rasmussen's skepticism of Josh Rogan's presentation of it. And it's funny because if people were on Twitter at the time, when Josh Rogan was challenged on whether he was presenting the cable's findings honestly, he actually refused to show it. And there's a question of why would you hide it if you know that if you think the cable says what you claim it says. And that's a very big indication that he was lying about that.
Yeah. One thing I really liked that you included in your article was this. Well, okay, so there's kind of two camps to this lab leak conspiracy group, right? One says that this is evil China's fault, and then the other one says that, and a lot of the people that are of this belief are actually people whom I have a good deal of respect for. So I want to be careful about how I talk about them, because they've done a lot of good work on other issues. I don't agree with them on this one. But these are people who say these are people who say that the U.S. was funding this evil research, or and there are variations of this, right? But one thing that I really appreciated you including in your article was this idea that if two hostile world powers are working on creating bioweapons or doing this evil gain of function stuff, why would they be cooperating? First of all, two countries with totally different economic doctrines. One is capitalist, the other one's communist. So it's not like you could say that they were trying to overtake the global economy together, right? One of them was totally prepared for the fallout, or at least became prepared very quickly. The other one is I don't know how many hundreds of thousands at this point. When I did my article back in, what was it, July or June, it was 600,000. I'm sure we're much higher at this point. China's what are they, less than 10,000 deaths from COVID? So it's just totally absurd to think that the U.S. and China might be working together on that kind of warfare research and development, right? It looks like we lost Josh. Great. So Carl, I mean, what's your what do you think of all this?
Yeah, I like to point out, people are saying, China had this lab researching coronavirus before the COVID happened. Coronavirus actually referred to a whole group of viruses, of which COVID is just the latest, mutation. Yeah. And China had a very serious outbreak of SARS back in 2003. For people who with longer memories may remember that. And SARS is a form of coronavirus. And in fact, it's because of the SARS outbreak, China started to funding the research into corona viruses, this group of viruses. But SARS virus is still very different from COVID. This is something. I mean, I'm not a microbiologist, but from what I have read, SARS, or in fact, initially when the cases were reported in Wuhan, China thought they had a new SARS outbreak, and they treated it as such. And what helped China is a lot of the preparations they have done over the years to prepare for the second SARS outbreak just happened to help with they switch gear and then use it, and China has a different governance model, right? I mean, China is very effective at mobilizing resources to deal with this epidemic, a national crisis. And I remember in January and February, at least in social media on Twitter, a lot of people were in US are kind of watching what's going on in China with kind of amusement. Look at all these Chinese, they're dropping like flies, or they're like, oh, look at they're spraying they're spraying antiseptics on their roads. How silly. Nobody imagined this could happen to them when it was no secret that China in January 25th locked down the whole city of Wuhan, a city of tens of millions of people. And even at this point, U.S. officials had done nothing in United States. And it's like as Josh said, if U.S. was in on this secret conspiracy of creating manufacturing COVID as a bioweapon, why they haven't done anything, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they had full now. If they had full knowledge of what's going on, and in fact, U.S. didn't. I remember because this is I tell a personal anecdotal story. In mid of February, my sister who lives in the Bay Area, our niece came down with severe flu-like symptoms, and she took my niece to get a flu test, and it came back negative. So my sister was freaking out. She thought, seeing what happened in China, she was worried that my niece might be getting COVID. And she went to contact all different places trying to get a COVID test for my niece. None of the hospital would do it. And they told her that, oh, this is handled by the county health center. And the county health center said, well, the CDC guideline is that, your daughter doesn't qualify because A, she doesn't have recent travel history to Wuhan. B, she doesn't have a known, contact with a known case of COVID patient, right? So per CDC guideline, we can't give your daughter the test. My sister was running around for weeks, trying to get my niece tested and running into the red tape. That was a situation in the United States, right? And now we know that's because CDC had that stupid guideline. Is because they didn't have all the test kits in place. They had, in fact, faulty test kits. So they came up with this stringent guideline to restrict testing because they didn't have enough test kits, right?
And you had Fauci saying that you don't need to be wearing a mask because there weren't.
Yes.
And then later admitting that was a lie. He was just saying it because there was a shortage for frontline workers, as they call them.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of incompetence at the time. But what really, to me, the most basic thing about all of this that nobody talks about is that every virus in that's been influential in human history, let's say, from Ebola to the bubonic plague, the previous SARS, AIDS, they all come from animals. They're transferred from animals to humans. And now all of a sudden there's a Cold War and we want to invent this novel way of it being created when that's really never happened, right? I mean, there's been biological warfare, weaponized viruses before, but a new strain, a virus that acts very different from others, we haven't seen that before. And now that there's a Cold War, we want to take this virus, which has caused all these problems, and create a totally different scenario that's outside of what human experience has been thus far. Yeah. So I think that's a really important point that people forget, just because we're in this we're of this idea that we're in a new world and a new territory. So Josh, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, so Josh turned off his camera so that maybe we could hear him a little better and he would stop getting disconnected. What do you think? What do you think of all that? Of the politics of this? Because I know that your articles have been very scientific, and you've talked to a lot of actual experts, people who do know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But so using that information, what have you deduced about the politics of this?
Can you be a little bit more precise in your question? Because there's so many different political angles. What aspects of the politics?
Well, I mean, the great power competition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this is more of the same that we're seeing right now with Taiwan, with the Uyghurs? Do you think that I don't know, man. You're
Okay.
just such a brilliant investigator. I just want you to tell me whatever we need to hear, you know?
Oh, okay. Well, basically, I think you could pretty much agree with that. Like pretty much, like you said at the beginning of this entire podcast, that like pretty much anything China related is going to be controversial, and they're going to try and spin like basically anything they can to like make China look bad. And
Yeah.
at the same time, like you kind of have no choice. Like if you're going to do what the U.S. government did, and basically sacrifice people for corporate profits throughout the world, and the U.S. has one of the highest death tolls of COVID. If you want to divert people's attentions from your government, from you, like let's say you're like the president, like you want to make them blame someone else. So it would just be a natural thing to do. Like if the outbreak started in India, for example, I'm not sure if the degree of the propaganda would be the same, but the tactic of scapegoating another country would probably be the same. So
Definitely. I'm really
yeah.
detecting a lot of narrative building in this, and it's interesting because we had a few episodes before this. We talked about the whole ivermectin thing, where there was a lot of very strong reactions and like all of that. And I feel like we also are kind of having this with the lab leak theory, except there are people who like Alex said, who I respect, who are pushing this theory. And I think that there's a pressure for people critical of the establishment to accept this theory. Like there's a pressure in like sort of our crowd to accept this theory because, if you don't, then you're seen as like some liberal that's like, like
Believing whatever Fauci says.
yeah, exactly. Or that like you're pro Fauci or whatever. When like it's just again people are getting sorted into camps. This is the same way that when we talked about ivermectin, people automatically assumed we were against like, vaccinations when I said very clearly that I took it. And so like either way, there's just this very aggressive ideological battle that's playing out, and it's kind of sad because you kind of see people who were very skeptical of Russiagate, who then now, unfortunately, kind of turn around and uncritically accept this lab leak theory, and again, kind of group people who don't accept it into like this naive liberal camp, and it's a very clever propaganda tactic in my view.
And what is
I
crazy
think
is all the American and European experts, coronavirus experts, they're saying this lab leak theory is crazy. It couldn't be done. But all the non-experts suddenly became experts. All the pundits are now talking like they have been certified by microbiologists, and they're all giving their opinion on this. But when the actual expert says no, that can't be done.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I found that I tweeted about a while ago is that the closest virus to COVID-19 that was studied at the Wuhan Institute of Virology shares only 96% of its genome with like SARS-CoV-19. So, I mean, that may sound really close, but I mean, to put it in perspective, humans and chimpanzees share 98.8% of their DNA. So, I mean, this is like a huge difference. And it's like, okay, so we have right now the Pandora Papers, right? We have all kinds of CIA hackers, anonymous hackers, anti-China people. I think if you look at like the online anonymous crowd, they're not particularly crazy about China. In fact, they were very supportive of the Hong Kong riots. Where are the leaks? Where are the leaks that are proving that that anything resembling SARS-CoV-19 was even present at the Wuhan Institute of Virology? They're not there. So I think that if there was something there, we would probably see that. I mean, of course, you can't say that with certainty, but there's got to be somebody that knows something about this virus being there, and we haven't seen that.
Right now,
I think
everything.
that's a good point. should I
Sorry,
continue, or
Josh.
Carl, do you want to talk?
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, yeah, I think that's a very good point that all of you made. Like, I think Alex talked about like how, like to successfully hide like the Wuhan Institute of Virology having a virus, a SARS-CoV-2 like virus in its lab that could serve as a proper progenitor. By progenitor, I mean it has to have at least 99% of a genome match, which so far we have no clue of or evidence of at all. But the point is that like so far the Intercept had leaked documents of a grant from the EcoHealth Alliance to the NIH, or from the NIH to the EcoHealth Alliance. Sorry, my directionality is getting a little confused. But the point is there were leaked documents, and they only proved that what the EcoHealth Alliance and what the Wuhan Institute of Virology were saying all along was true, that they were only working with SARS-CoV-1 like viruses. And SARS-CoV-1, if you know the difference between the genome between that and SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-1 shares about 80%, and that's way further than RATG13, the virus you were talking about. That's a 96% match.
Yeah.
And Dr. Stephen Goldstein, who I talked to, said that the probability of creating SARS-CoV-2 from RATG13, which has a 96% match, is 0%, because scientists need at least a minimum of 99% of a genome match, or as high as 99.9, which has not been found. Even last month, when French and Laotian scientists found the bat virus, that didn't even hit 97%. So this is the closest one we have.
And that was right. Yeah.
That was discovered last month.
Right. Yeah, I think that article has gone under the radar too, and I think I saw it in Bloomberg. Was these scientists found the closest match to the coronavirus in the wild, in surprise, not in a lab in the Soviet Union, but in a bat cave, and it was 97%. So it's still, I mean, they couldn't have even taken that and turned it into what it is today, because it's too different. Nope. But it's still the closest thing that they found. So and there's got to be, I mean, maybe you know something about this. There's got to be like thousands of these that we've yet to discover, right?
Yeah. Part of the reason why the EcoHealth Alliance's research is so important is because they're funding scientists to go out and look for viruses that might cause the next pandemic. And as hard as it might be to believe, like there's just literally so many bats out there that we literally have no idea, like the kinds of viruses that are out there. And if you cut back research on that now, you're basically leaving us less prepared. And I think that's part of the reason why this gain of function controversy is so dangerous, because it's being misunderstood. Basic virology research is being misinterpreted as dangerous research that creates viruses. And although like we already have maybe hundreds of viruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that's not even close to like how many viruses are out there in the wild, because I think most non-scientists severely underestimate what's out there. And yeah, and it's kind of funny because I'm going off on a slight tangent, but I remember reading like the first Intercept article, and like they were talking about like how researchers doing this kind of research is bad because they might get bitten by a bat, but like you don't get respiratory viruses.
You could become the Batman.
That's not what happens. Like respiratory viruses are not known to be able to transmit through blood-mediated transmission, and like you can't, because when an animal bite pierces your skin, the infected animal bite the virus would go into your bloodstream, but respiratory viruses aren't spread that way. And when I talked to another scientist named Dr. Stanley Perlman, he told me that he'd worry about rabies instead of SARS-CoV-2 if he got bit by a bat. And like it's just such a stupid like assertion that like I can't believe that the Intercept journalist like did not even bother to fact check this minimal thing, because like this has been known for years, and like it just shows me how gullible they are. They just take any lab leak scientist at face value. They don't question anything, and they're just publishing these dangerous claims that makes doing regular field work to find viruses that might cause a pandemic as something dangerous or bad.
Yeah, and they're trying to frame like pro lab leak theory stuff as like the skeptic's view, and like trying to make like kind of what I said before, like they're trying to make the establishment narrative, that it was not a lab leak. And it again just ends up it's just to again manufacture consent for hostility toward China at the end of the day. And it's just really incredible how many people have been hooped into this. And I saw one of the comments in our stream about Sagar and Jetty, and I laughed because I was just thinking to myself, I listened to like 20 minutes of him and Crystal Ball on Joe Rogan, and
Why would you do that?
I was curious. Okay, I was out of podcasts to listen to, and and so I took a listen, and it was really funny because they're talking about how, oh, we're no longer beholden to establishment interests anymore, or like, now that we have our own show, we're so independent. And like then just turning around and like, going on this full out like anti-China blast, like as though it came straight out of the mainstream media to begin with. And so again, it's just so funny to me how like this is the one issue where everyone just falls in line, no matter like, because usually on like left or like anti-war issues, there's at least some consensus, right? Like there's no one who's part of this anti-establishment group that like bought into Russiagate, for instance. But on this issue, for some reason, it's unbelievable. And I have to wonder why. Like, is it just because we're so propagandized? Is that it? Or like, is there something more? Is it because, like Trump called this the whole like China virus, and so now it's seen as anti-establishment to be anti-China because they see Trump as anti-establishment? I don't know, but it's crazy.
Even among the left, I noticed, maybe just more cultural familiarity. People rejecting the U.S. Spin on Venezuela, in Bolivia, on Cuba, but they still buy everything U.S. media says about China. I mean, there's a disconnect here. Why would you think U.S. is telling lies on Cuba, but is telling the truth 100% on China? How does that compute?
Well, China's where it actually matters, right? Like you can bloviate all you want about the Great Revolution of Cuba or Bolivia or Venezuela, and it doesn't really fucking matter. It just doesn't. Like the primary contradiction is between the U.S. and China globally. Those are the two superpowers. So that's where your stance actually matters, and that's why I think the left is afraid to not promote all the kind of rabid anti-China propaganda and regurgitate it. I mean, you look at, speaking of Crystal and Sagar, who are like two of the most hawkish people in left media on China.
They're left?
I just saw a clip of their former show. What's that, girl?
I didn't realize they're left.
Well, the American left is still imperialist. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they're not. There's no anti-imperialist left in America.
I saw a clip of now Ryan Grimm, the DC bureau chief at The Intercept, is the new host of Rising, and I guess he has like a contributor. Her name's Kim Iverson. I had never heard of her until I saw this clip, and I just saw it last night. But she started like pushing back on some of the Uyghur propaganda, and fucking Ryan Grimm went full psycho. He was just like, he had like blood coming out of his eyes, trying to tell her that she was wrong, how it's okay to criticize China because either way the establishment's going to try to provoke hostility, so it doesn't really matter what we say. I'm sorry, if you're of that opinion, get the fuck out of journalism. Well, if you think that what you say doesn't matter, then get out of journalism. Like you don't belong here.
And Kim Iverson, at least she previously, I know on her channel, she actually interviewed Daniel Dumbrell, who actually just recently visited Xinjiang. Right? She actually talked to people who've been there. I don't know about Ryan Grimm.
No, he sits in fucking Washington D.C. and chums it up with like people that work at responsible statecraft, like the Quincy Institute, and like all the other cool progressive Matt Duss. I'm sure he hangs out with him. The Bernie Sanders foreign policy people who are, might as well be Hillary
I mean,
Clinton's foreign policy people.
I debated with Noah Smith, who is a opinion columnist in Bloomberg. We had a debate about China, and
that halfway through
the debate, he admitted he never been to mainland China. I'm like, you are writing all these opinion posts about China in your large platform, then it just become more apparent to me. Not only you had never been to China, but you know very little about China. So why are you doing this? You are doing this because now China is a hot topic, right? But you are talking as if you are expert. I mean, like that's the whole of the U.S. media establishment right now.
Yeah, well, to become an expert on China, there's really one thing that you have to do, and you just have to update your Twitter bio.
And read the New York Times, maybe. What's funny to me too is like, because we're talking about the left, but it's also like what's very fascinating is like you see the right in real time be like, don't believe the mainstream media, fake news, blah blah blah, and then it's like, oh, but when they talk about China, then everything's true, of course. Like everything on CNN is fake, but on China, it's actually true. That to me is kind of amusing. And I am not like an expert on China, and I don't purport to be. I literally just ask for basic skepticism on anything. The Uyghur issue is something I was a little bit more vocal on just because I follow Middle East politics, and I was commenting about the presence in the Middle East. And I was very shocked to see, again, like even if you push back a little bit on the mainstream media narrative, the kind of accusations leveled against you are so intense and so aggressive that it's just like everyone's just become a foot soldier for the New York Times, CNN narrative, even when they pretend like they are opposed to establishment media.
I mean, then you have... Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, I think it's easy to interrupt me just because my camera's not on, so you can't see my mouth move or anything. I'm so sorry. But I think Mila like raises a lot of great points. Like I think I can't really blame like people too harshly who have fallen for like stuff like the lab leak theory and other narratives, just because like the lab leak theory in particular, like you're trained to recognize that like corporate media lies to you about like or distorts many different issues, and like you're kind of, if you follow along enough, you might be tempted to take like a contrarian stance, like everything they say is absolutely wrong, and like you might be tempted to do that. But I think for people who think that embracing the lab leak theory is an anti-establishment position, I'd like to say a few things, like, or like even Xinjiang or like whatever, like the idea that like embracing anything that makes China looks bad as anti-establishment is silly, just because the entire U.S. government is doing that, Democrats and Republicans. So the idea that you're challenging the establishment by supporting what the CNN and New York Times reports about China, like you're kind of doing the opposite. You're actually being pro-establishment when you do that. And in particular to the lab leak theory, like it's true that most scientists do not believe it, but I think we should also remember that the U.S. government did not listen to most scientists on how to handle COVID. So just because most scientists say it doesn't mean that the U.S. government actually listens to them, and that doesn't mean that they hold a lot of political power. Like if you're a virologist in America, like an average virologist, I can imagine you like them like wanting to like rip their hair out because the U.S. government is just doing the opposite of what they're recommending. And so the idea that you're challenging the establishment by challenging what most virologists say is just silly, because the U.S. government does not listen to virologists and scientists. And right now, even the lab leak theory is being pushed by the U.S. government. They're trying to present it as equally likely possibilities when that is just completely silly. Like there is no evidence they had SARS-CoV-2 in the lab. And like the idea that scientists could get SARS-CoV-2 from the wild when they wear personal protective equipment like PPE, compared to like the average Chinese citizen in rural areas, like they're much more likely to come into contact with the virus like that, like hundreds to thousands of times more likely to do that. And that's just like simple math. Like that's you don't need to believe Fauci. You don't need to do that. That's just simple logic. And I think those are a few good points to make about this whole thing. But I think Carl knows more about Xinjiang than I do, so I'll defer to him on that.
Oh, regarding the Xinjiang, we have these U.S. experts, from like the spooky school, Georgetown University, coming out saying, "Oh, the Xinjiang is a phantom menace, right? Like China totally made up about all these terrorist attacks and stuff like that." Then I don't know if you guys just saw the news. ISIS Khorasan just did a bombing in Kunduz in Afghanistan. Over 100 people were killed, and ISIS, in their ISIS statement, they said that their bomber is a Uyghur, and they even stated.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they said it was a Uyghur. It's actually picked up by Wall Street journals right now, and they said the stated aim is because China is working with Taliban China is pressuring Taliban to deport all the Uyghur militants in Afghanistan back to China. So the ISIS Khorasan is doing that to protest Taliban policies, and by targeting the Shia worshippers in Kunduz, these Hazara who are, Taliban is not the friendliest group toward Shias to begin with, right? And this is and the fact that there's very little reporting in U.S. media that there's actually thousands of Uyghur fighters in Syria fighting the war against Assad. I mean, how do they even run? Like, there's only one couple AP articles reported on this. Yeah. And they still present it as, oh, these oppressed Uyghurs, they, in order to fight their freedom, they have to travel to Syria to gain battle experience.
That's what kills me the most, really. Like that's how I became into this issue, is because they're not fighting against us. Like they're not fighting against Assad. These Islamic militants in Syria are fighting against vulnerable minority communities fundamentally. And there are videos of these fighters that are published even in mainstream outlets like Al Jazeera, where they're threatening terrorist attacks. So it's not even really disputable. And my whole problem is, like, I don't think this should be Syria's problem, right? Like, Syria should not prosecute these people because they have enough problems on their hands. Like, why should they have to deal with these terrorists? So if China's going to take them off Syria's hands, by all means, please do, like that was kind of my view on it. And again, I don't know the details of what's happening there. I'm not very particularly carceral, and so I have never endorsed anything wholesale, but I have been vocal in saying, if you go to Syria, the home of the oldest Christian communities in the Middle East, and you join an Islamist militant group, like, I'm sorry, I'm not a prison abolitionist for you. Like, you need to be dealt with. And that's all I've really said on the issue. And I've never experienced, like, that is some of the harshest vitriol I've experienced from that. And it's just unbelievable to me.
Yeah. I feel like the issue of Syria and now the issue of the Uyghurs have been the two, at least in my time working in journalism and politics, those have been the two hottest issues, the most contentious things, because they really get to the core of what, well, forgive me, but of what leftism is supposed to be, right? Because on one hand, you have leftists who think that anti-fascism, preventing genocide, is like the main calling of the left, right? And they say, well, Assad's doing a genocide. The media says this. Assad's doing a genocide. Xi Jinping is doing a genocide. And so it becomes an issue that's not like, during Russiagate, people would say, "Oh, you support a mafia dictatorship," and it's like, okay, yeah, you can say that, whatever.
I mean, but
Now
the thing is, you don't have to be, you don't have to be supporter of Saddam Hussein to realize
Right.
Iraq war is a disastrous, for the people of Iraq. And I still believe, anti-imperialism should be one of the top priority for the left. If you think. Okay. If you think Saddam is bad, why would you think U.S. military would do a better job to further the life of all ordinary Iraqis in Middle East? And the same applies to Syria and China. Why do you think that U.S. has the best interest of the people there in heart? And they don't. They don't care. They don't care anything. They don't care about the ordinary people in Iraq, in Syria, in China. They only care about continue the grift, to continue to increase the military budget so all the defense contractors get big houses in Virginia. And we have all this reportage about how U.S. spent $2.5 trillion on Afghanistan. That didn't get spent on Afghanistan. $2 trillion of that went to the U.S. military contractors. They just take the money from they take the money from ordinary people and give it to very few, the well-connected, all these weapon manufacturer guys. So that
the money
has
and
been,
the lives.
Yeah, that's the logic of empire. They didn't do it to save the women of Afghanistan. If they were worried about the girls' education, they could have just not funding the Mujahideens back in 1980s. So yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, one thing I wrote a while ago was General Mark Milley was saying that the U.S. can't withdraw from Afghanistan because it would turn women's rights back to the Stone Age. And it's like, how dare a United States general invoke the Stone Age when talking about Afghanistan when we've dropped, tens of thousands of bombs. We've turned it into the Stone Age. Forget about this metaphor of women's rights. It's literally the fucking Stone Age.
Well, it's funny to me because you wrote that and you attended that conference about China and you were saying how it's like under the guise of religious freedom. And it's funny to me to see people harping about religious freedom while, not caring or supporting people who are, again, terrorizing religious minorities in Syria. These people, for some reason, they used to be concerned with Middle East Christian persecution. They would put a little noon in their profile picture or whatever. And now you totally see how cynical this was, because now they're making this full turn. Oh, okay, well, now it's not expedient to support Christians in the Middle East anymore. We have to go back to our old ways of supporting the Islamic extremists.
Well, there was some of that, but the big contradiction that I saw, because there was a lot of, this conference, it wasn't all empire, right? There was some truth to some of it, but the big contradiction was like all these people who throughout the 9/11 era were vicious, absolutely vicious towards Muslims. And doing these symbolic things like banning Sharia law from influencing local government policies, like that was ever happening in the first place. And, just all around hostile towards Muslims, now taking up the cause of the Uyghurs under the guise of religious freedom. So that was the big contradiction. But Carl, you looked like you were going to say something, so please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Just go ahead.
You have anything, Josh?
Not right now. I'm also brain farting. I'm so sorry.
I wanted to respond to what Nilla said earlier about pretending to care about Middle East Christians. But I want to say let's be honest. Most Americans don't even realize they're Christians in the Middle East.
I know. I went to school in Vancouver for high school, and I have a memory of because my family is from the Middle East, but half of them are Christian, and I had brought up like a difference in our church because I long story short, Melkites get confirmed at baptism. So I brought that up. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And some people in my class were so shocked, and they were like, I did not know there were Christians in the Middle East. Like, and
I thought Jesus
thinking,
was
like,
from Kentucky.
and I'm like, you guys have had like 15 years of Catholic education, and you don't know where your religion started. Like, I'm
People
floored.
think Jesus is a Swede, Jesus is Swedish.
I don't even think Americans can tell the difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims.
Yeah, well, that I feel like it's funny too, because now one of the big like hawk things to do is to be like anti-Shia. Like, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's like people who call themselves like Shia watchers instead of like, being anti-Muslim. It's just like anti-Shia. And I think this started with the Syria thing, but now it's also to be like anti-Iran and whatever. So you have like all these pundits that are Islamophiles for like Sunnis, but not for Shia. And it makes me laugh because it's like they literally sound like they've adopted like jihadi ideology, but it's like some guy in DC.
And remember that the Syrian war was the mainstream media narrative tried to spin the Syrian war as a Sunni genocide.
That's like the Middle East version of white genocide theory.
Yeah. When
I
Syria,
say this as my other half being Sunni, so like
and when Syria is like actually a Sunni majority country, they try to. It's just playing on the ignorance of a lot of the West, a lot of the Western audience.
Well, bringing it back to Taiwan, I know that their biggest annual military drill is called Han Glory. So I mean, could you? Are racial politics a big at play in the Taiwan issue?
Well, Taiwan right now is 98% Han, but it's because it's indigenous community now. The indigenous Taiwanese groups only consist of 2% of the population. This is a result of continuous immigration from mainland for the last 400 years. Started under the Dutch colonialization when the Dutch realized they can make more money by importing Chinese Han migrant laborers into Taiwan and tax them, and that's but you see right now the media, Western media, you seem to there's now a spin trying to portray PRC as a Han supremacist state. But what does that even mean? I mean, like, is there anything in the Chinese constitution that says the Han is the number one, or there's nothing like that. There's a lot of projection.
And in fact, they get angry about the ethnic unity laws, right? So at the same time that they say that there's Han supremacy, they say these ethnic unity laws are bad.
They're saying, China is a Han ethno state. And at the same time, they say China should be breaking up into these mini ethno states, right? It doesn't make sense.
And at the same time, they're Nazis, right?
Yep.
I think knowing about China's autonomous regions would probably blow their minds, because there's not really an ethno state, but like they give a lot of autonomy to like ethnic majorities in regions in China. Is that correct, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, you have to, in Inner Mongolia, for example, to be a public servant, you have to pass a test in both Standard Mandarin and Mongolian. You have to know Mongolian language in order to be a public servant, to be in the government in Inner Mongolia, and that applies to also there's the autonomous. The autonomous region laws mandate that there need to be the locals have a right to be educated in the local language. So in Xinjiang, they have Uyghur schools, Kazakh school, Kyrgyz schools, etc., and ditto Tibet.
So yeah, I just don't think these people who want like China to break up into multiple ethno states, I just don't think they're aware of autonomous regions or don't have any serious understanding of them. And I remember looking at China's constitution and being shocked, because I remember something I think it was Article 4. It was condemning Han chauvinism, like, and like that's exactly the opposite of what a Han supremacist state would do.
Yeah, Mao talked about that a lot actually in the Mao selected works. He warned against the Han chauvinism. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, another point though is like, would these countries want to be broken up into ethno-states themselves? Like, would the US
Yes.
consent to this? Like, I don't think so. And so, like, it just seems again to defy common sense. Like, you could even think that there is some like ethnic, like, even if you assume there is ethnic supremacy, is the solution really to divide? Like, it just seems like there's no
Segregation.
practical consideration. Well, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that this is like absolutely absurd because I see this all the time that the left, on one hand, wants for autonomy in Tibet, autonomy in Xinjiang, autonomy. I'm seeing Inner Mongolia a lot more lately. That's becoming a more prominent issue. Autonomy in Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc. But so they ask for ethnic autonomy on one hand, but on the other hand, they're opposed to segregation, and it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, what? I mean, we're as leftists, we are supposed to be against ethno-states, right? We're supposed to be in favor of multiculturalism, inclusion, these sorts of things, and at the same time, you know, we're supporting the East Turkestan separatist movements, the separatists of Tibet, which has kind of taken a backseat to the Uyghur issue. But I think that it'll be deployed again at some point.
Remember in 2008 during the Beijing Olympics, at that time the talk was there's a genocide in Tibet, right? There's now they don't talk about it. I mean, you know, right now you can't have a high-speed rail going to Tibet. You can take the high-speed rail there and see what's going on.
Well, what I really want China to do is to take on the cause of Quebec separatism in Canada and try and argue to break Canada up from Quebec. Yeah. I really think we need that kind of spiciness in the discourse. And like, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to support our separatists, we're going to support your separatists.
No, I mean,
it'd be really
could
fun.
you imagine, you know, Samira Khan the other day tweeted, imagine if China was doing this with Alaska, right? I mean, if there was any parity in this,
just imagine, you know, like, you know, during the Hong Kong protests, a whole bunch of Ted Cruz and a whole bunch of Josh Hawley, they all went to Hong Kong and showed support, solidarity with the protesters. Now, just imagine during January 6th Capitol riots, the Chinese Communist Party leaders went to Washington and said, show solidarity to the protester. The American media will go nuts. They will go nuts.
No, it would. And like, I mean, there's always people freaking out about foreign interference, right? Like, I just thought that was funny after Russiagate as well, because it's like, you know, how dare Russia run Facebook ads about like Jesus or whatever it was, like there's some ridiculous Facebook ads. But you know, we're gonna send our senators over to like support an insurrection.
Well, yeah, actually, and I saw some media spin already. I remember there were a couple articles saying that during the Black Lives Matters movement, because the Chinese state media issue some criticize the U.S. Human rights treatment of its minority, that China is actively stoking racism in United States. I'm like, you don't need to stoke racism in the United States. There's plenty in the United States.
Yeah, it's already there. Yeah, I know.
Actually, my latest article is actually about that topic. Yeah, so like it was interesting because like a lot of Western media outlets like The Independent, The Wall Street Journal, they were just like, oh, there's a Chinese disinformation campaign. They're getting Asian Americans to start protesting against racism, and like they made it seem like there were multiple protests. But like I actually read the original source for their reports. It was by a security firm called Mondiant, They cited one instance of it, only one instance. It was supposed to be a New York City protest on April 24th, but basically nobody showed up, and it didn't actually happen. So they cited this one incident which never actually happened, and social media posts that got like 0 engagement as
Wow.
evidence of a Chinese disinformation campaign. And they couldn't even find any evidence that the Chinese government was behind it because there is no evidence of that. So they're just saying that China's doing this, but there's no evidence for it, and they're making Asian Americans like if in the they could potentially make Asian Americans look like dupes if they start protesting racism, like oh they're all just victims of a Chinese disinformation campaign, and that could also be a pretext for American social media companies to start censoring accounts who are talking about anti-Asian racism among all this China hawkery.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
a good point.
We're gonna. I think that in the next 5 years, we're gonna see the death of organizing on social media. I mean, I remember when I first got into journalism, in 2014, I kept tabs on all the protests in New York City and then later in DC through Facebook because they made Facebook events, and that was like the primary way that you would get people to show up for Black Lives Matter, for various things, for when actual Nazis came to Charlottesville or DC. That was how you organized it. We're gonna see that's gonna be gone. It's just not gonna exist anymore. And the reason for that is because we now have January 6th. We now have them saying this is how it was used. Facebook is responsible. Twitter's responsible. All these social media websites brought this upon us, and so now we have to crack down. And it was never really about January 6th. You know, I don't want to get down that rabbit hole right now, but 4 hours where the police were opening up the barricades for people to get into the Capitol, like you knew that was going to be used, and it is going to be used to stop political organizing.
And they have yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I had a brain fart.
What I want to say is that this is going to empower, not only disempower grassroots organizing, but it's going to empower AstroTurf, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the people that are going to be putting on the protests for the Beijing 2022 Olympics aren't going to have any trouble organizing, right? They're not relying on Facebook to get people involved, right? They have these established networks, and it's going to be explosive. Beijing 2022. I hope people are prepared for the deluge of propaganda that we're going to see around that. I've been trying to report on that as much as possible. I don't talk about sports ever, but this is going to be a big deal, and they're not going to have any trouble orchestrating these protests. People in Hong Kong, they're going to be rioting as normal. But the grassroots, the rapid responses to things like police brutality in the U.S., this is where we're going to see that impact of that crackdown on organizing on social media. So I think that really needs to be pointed out. Say what you want about the January 6th people. I'm sure I wouldn't want to hang out with them myself, but it's like with Alex Jones, right? Like. Yeah, the QAnon shaman.
Yeah, the shaman.
I should go as him for Halloween. Really,
oh my
that
God,
should be my costume. I've been trying to think what my costume should be. But it was the same thing with Alex Jones and his censoring on social media. You take the worst guy and use him as an example for the rest of the townspeople to know that this is not going to be okay going forward.
Oh,
what are your thoughts, Josh?
I think everyone knows that like I'm actually against free speech, but I think one thing I could say is that I'm in agreement with everyone here that like it would be a bad idea to let social media companies like Twitter and Facebook to do that, to start censoring people, because their motive is not for the public good. Their motive is in alignment with the U.S. government and for a profit motive. So like even though I do have this position, I do not support giving our tech overlords the power to do that kind of stuff. I think that's extremely dangerous, and I would not support that either.
Yeah. I mean, Facebook is partnering with our Atlantic Council to censor our speech, to vet our speech. So, yeah.
Yeah, sounds great. No, I mean, with this Olympic thing, it was really entertaining to me to see this play out, but very disturbing, of course. But we had Elizabeth May, I think, our Green Party leader, or maybe it wasn't Elizabeth, it was one of the Green Party people, and they were saying, oh, well, we shouldn't have the Olympics in China because of human rights abuses and like whatever. And I'm like, we literally have just uncovered the bodies of like dead Indigenous children in Canada. From the residential school system. The count is over 1,000, and you're talking about like it is just the most convenient deflection. And we hosted the Olympics here, and so she suggested relocating the Olympics to Canada, and I was just like, I couldn't believe the lack of self-awareness.
So I think one other point I want to say is that like I'm not endorsing this, but like I think this is evidence that the U.S. government doesn't believe its own claims about Xinjiang, because if you believe that China is doing a genocide in Xinjiang, the rational and moral thing to do is to boycott Beijing 22 Olympics, but America is still participating in it. So you don't think a genocide is worth boycotting Olympics over? Again, I'm not endorsing this, but I'm just giving this as an example of like, does the U.S. government believe its own claims? Because if you're claiming this, how can you in good conscience participate in Beijing 2022?
Well, there's going to be protests, and there's maybe not boycott by the U.S. government. There's a lot of money involved in all this, and I think both sides acknowledge that. I heard that plenty from the people pushing boycotts at that summit I went to, and from what I've read online. But there will be protests, and they will be endorsed by the United States, probably supported by the United States covertly. And there might even be protests by U.S. government officials. We're going to see a kind of posturing that we haven't yet. I think the Beijing Olympics are going to be a flashpoint. Carl?
Yeah, I think we might see a kind of flashback to 2008 during the torch relays. There was I remember there was a famous incident when a disabled a Chinese athlete holding the torch was attacked by one of the pro-Tibetan independence activists in Paris. We will probably again see something like that again, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Maybe since U.S. fitness is declining, because of the terrible whatever, they might boycott it and say it's about human rights, but it's actually because like they can't even cut sugar out of their diets, and so maybe they'll
it's because boycotting Frosted Flakes is
But it's Winter Olympics. They're looking forward to humiliate PRC at the medal count. There's actually an article about that, about how China might be getting show up on Winter Olympics. I'm trying to find it now, but yeah.
Yeah, but even still, I mean, that's not enough. Because what they're doing is they're putting as much these groups, which a lot of them are supported by the National Endowment for Democracy, and a lot of them are, otherwise on the periphery of U.S. intelligence, and they're putting as much pressure as they can on athletes and celebrities to take a stand, and they're going after the same people who were very vocal about Black Lives Matter. And I worry that this might be successful because, let's face it, celebrities don't have very high media literacy. I remember Colin Kaepernick meeting with Bana Alabad, right?
Oh
wow!
Nobody talks about that, but that
I
happened,
didn't even
right?
know that happened.
Oh yeah, there's pictures out there. You can look it up.
Hilarious.
And so I think that they're probably going to be pretty successful in this pressure campaign on athletes.
Does Bana speak English now?
A little bit. I know her favorite food is fish. Did you ever see that interview?
Yeah, I saw that clip.
Yeah. This is gonna be like we're gonna end up like going to war with China over like a Jamila Jamil tweet or something.
No.
Just being like, we have to say.
I don't know who that is.
Really, she's like
place.
the prime lib. Like, it's hard to explain. Like, you have to look into it yourself.
I am like the most stupid person on pop culture. I really don't.
So she's really like not in the know about things, but she's like really tries to like signal like all the liberal pieties and like
Yeah.
there's some speech by Louis Farrakhan and she didn't know who he was. And so she like shared it and she was like who is this wonderful man like talking about racism and whatever, and then everyone's like
That's funny.
but yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's
well,
just-
they'll get her on board.
yeah, no, that's what I mean. Like
She'll have a sit down with Tersine Ziwaduin or whatever.
Wait, I found the article. It's from The Economist, the May 15th edition. China is in danger of being humiliated at the Winter Olympic because of the ice hockey.
Yeah, okay.
And the Jamaican bobsled team. All right, guys. We're past an hour and a half now, so if you have any closing thoughts, feel free to butt in. No, otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Josh, again, we have Josh Cho. You can find him on Twitter at JoshC0301. You can also find him from my Twitter because I linked to that. I linked to his account. Excellent journalist, writer for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. That's fair.org. And recently has been contributing to Mint Press News. And Carl Za, host of Silk and Steel podcast, excellent China commentator, serial murderer in debates. So we appreciate both of you guys coming on. It's been a fascinating discussion, and we will see you guys next week.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you